Welcome to the Revenue Room podcast. I'm Heather Holst-Knudsen, your host and the CEO and founder of H2K Labs and the architect behind the Revenue Room portfolio. This is where CEOs and revenue-critical C-suite leaders come when they're done with theory and want the truth about what actually drives growth in a data and AI-powered economy. Every episode brings you the most interesting, forward-thinking operators in the business. These are people who are not just talking about the future, they're building it. These are leaders rewriting business models, redefining value creation, and moving faster than the market's trying to disrupt them. Everything we talk about is shaped by the ecosystem behind us. Revved Up, our flagship summit for CEOs and revenue-critical CXOs who trade real playbooks, not just platitudes, and Revenue Room CXO, the invite-only network and year-round growth operating system for leaders who refuse to fall behind. If you're listening, you already feel the urgency. The gap between the companies that adapt and the ones that don't is widening. The only question is where you'll land. So let's get into it. Today's guest is Philip Thomas, Chief Creative Officer, Global Brands at Informa PLC and Chairman of Cannes Lions International Festival of Creativity. In a company where Chief Creative Officer titles are virtually non-existent outside marketing services, Philip's role signals something fundamental. Creativity, brand, and experience design are now recognized as revenue drivers, not cost centers. He oversees Informa's festival portfolio, including Cannes Lion, Money 2020, Black Hat, Game Developers Conference, and London Tech Week, properties that generate hundreds of millions in revenue by creating what Philip calls experience-led events, where communities don't transact, they connect. Philip's path to success reads like a masterclass in business model transformation. He moved from consumer magazine publishing in the 1990s into B2B events as digital disruption decimated traditional media, acquired Cannes Lion for $53 million, and built it into a brand well worth over half the $1.6 billion USD Informa paid for Ascential in 2024. That acquisition exposed a striking reality. Ascential traded at $350 million in October 2023 and sold for $1.6 billion USD 9 months later. Not because Informa overpaid, but because public markets fundamentally undervalue event businesses. Today, as AI reshapes how businesses operate and human connection becomes increasingly valuable, Philip is building the commercial infrastructure to turn tribal instinct into sustainable revenue growth. Welcome, Philip. So great to see you again. Welcome to the Revenue Room podcast.
Thanks very much, Heather. Good to see you again.
And I'd love for you to just give the audience a brief overview of your background. I started off with a quick summary, but you have a really interesting trajectory as your career from traditional magazine publishing to where you are today as Chief Creative Officer at Informa PLC.
Yeah, sure. I mean, just very briefly, I started off in consumer magazines as a writer and then ultimately an editor and publisher of various consumer magazines in the 90s. Around the mid-2000s, I came to the conclusion that, maybe slightly late, but I came to the conclusion that magazines were not necessarily the most vibrant place to be. And having spent my career in magazines, of course, you then have to think of, well, what could I possibly pivot to that might not be hugely disrupted by digital? And I thought about events for lots of reasons, some of which we might get into during this conversation. And I joined the events business. I took over Cannes Lions, which is the advertising event in Cannes in France. And since then, I've been involved in lots of different B2B events. So that's a brief summary of my career.
We'll get into this obviously, but the Cannes Lion part is one that I like. That event is like the iconic event, and here in the U.S., by the way, just in New York City, the 2 weeks running up to Cannes Lion, no one does anything except prepare for Cannes Lion. It's like you can't get a meeting. No one was it like that when you acquired it, or was that something you built as part of the investment that you made?
Yeah, I mean, we acquired it in 2005 for 55 million or 53 million euros. It was a small event. It was a very niche event. It was pure advertising, mainly around creativity, and creative agency people were the people who went there. And the transformation that's happened in the last sort of 20 years or so since then has been driven by a transformation in the industry and in the market that we have managed to track. So as more clients became interested, platforms we managed to get ourselves into the position where we could sell our services, so to speak, to these players, and they engaged and they lent in. So now at Cannes Lions, we have obviously the advertising agency groups, but we also have many brands, many hundreds, many thousands of brands, and we also have media owners, both B2B and B2C media owners, but also platforms, Spotify, Meta, Google, Apple, and also other kinds of media owners like Amazon, for instance, and Walmart. So it's a bit of a microcosm of the way that communications, marketing, and retail is changing.
I just even wrote, I just was drawing it, like you had this core, this niche, and it's like it radiated out into all of these different, what was adjacent, but which is really now part of the core ecosystem. It's really an incredible story, by the way. So, which probably will lead to my next question or the next couple of questions. But before that, I one of the other things, we met in November 2024 and at your offices in London, and you had just closed on the Informa acquisition. And you went over as chairman or executive chairman. And now I thought was so interesting. I saw the announcement, I don't know if it was 8 months ago or so, of this title you have, which is Chief Creative Officer, which I've never heard before in our industry. So talk about what drove the decision to create this role. And I think for you particularly, it's so apropos, but how are you extending that, not just within the festival group, but Informa overall? Because I actually noticed that, the Informa PLC connection.
Yeah, sure. So just for those who don't know, Ascential was the company that owned Money 2020 and Cannes Lions. We were acquired by Informa, which I think is the biggest, most consequential event organizer in the world. We were acquired by them. And initially, I was the chairman of one of the groups of Informa. But ultimately, what happened was that the board, the CEO, Stephen Carter, and the board of Informa feel rightly, in my view, that B2B events are changing and they need to change faster. And what they need is innovation, creativity, experience, and they need to shift from being events into being brands. And I think the view was that Cannes Lions had achieved that to a certain extent. Money 2020 had as well to a certain extent. So now I'm working across 5 or 6 different verticals, the gaming vertical, I'm working in pharmaceutical vertical, I'm working in the longevity and anti-aging vertical as well as Cannes Lions and Money 2020. So we've chosen some big markets for me to focus on. And the idea there is that to try to track the change that our customers are expecting from us when it comes to the creation of B2B events.
So the longevity one actually is interesting because that, so you had the whole creativity, you had the gaming, you had Money 2020, which that has its own history behind it. One of the leading events, I think, that really broke records in terms of just going from an event to like a brand. Just everything you even see today about what Money 2020 does is really just always groundbreaking. But the longevity in the pharmaceutical, that's like, okay, don't seem to fit in. Talk about how those are now. Why? What was the decision to bring those into the fold?
Well, the criteria for choosing the different markets to be involved with really revolved around, is this a market that needs fixing or is it a market that we can accelerate? And certainly in the case of pharmaceuticals, so the event I'm involved in is CPHI, which is a very large event in Frankfurt, and we've got others around the world as well. And the feeling was with that event and with the longevity event, these are very hot markets, very powerful markets that are growing very rapidly. So how can we position ourselves to make sure that we're maximizing the opportunity? And I think there's a very strong feeling amongst all of us here at Informa that the transactional nature of B2B events has past to a great extent. And while people still do go to B2B events to meet customers and to meet suppliers and to perform transactions, there's a lot more to it than that. And really it's around connections, genuine connections. It's around experiences and what does it feel like? What's the emotion that I have when I go to this event? And it's a blurring of really our expectations in our private life. How do we expect a restaurant to look and feel? How do we expect a concert that we go to look and feel? The B2B event world has been ignoring that kind of human necessity for a long time. So we feel this is the way that the industry is going. So it's very exciting and working with lots of different groups of very talented people to try to bring this to life.
No, that's terrific. And I happen to be very passionate about the longevity area myself, just due to my age, which seems to be my age is, I would say it's the 50 to, 65, and more that are really driving this. But there are lots of longevity conferences popping up. And but I think that concept that am I really going to this event because I want to transact, or am I going because I want to be inspired and I want to feel good and I want to know there's this path and I want to learn, and there's a lot of new innovation happening. So I think it's a great market to add into that.
Well, it's a very hot market. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're now 18 months into the Informa integration, and what's one of the operational or commercial synergies that's driving revenue impact faster than you expected when the transaction first took place?
Yeah, so just to give people context, Ascential was a relatively small business. We had 700 or 800 people. It was, in the great scheme of things, a small public company. What Informa bring is capability, global capability to accelerate growth. So to give you a couple of examples, Money 2020 had the event. We've got a big event in Las Vegas. We've got a very successful event in Amsterdam. We've got an event in Bangkok. And we always thought there was an opportunity to look at the Middle East. And in fact, I'd been looking at the Middle East for some time for Money 2020. Now, Informa have a JV down there. They have an entire team down there in Saudi. They have amazing relationships with the government of Saudi. They know the customers. They know the venues. They've got an entire infrastructure. So what we were able to do was to massively fast track the launch of Money 2020 in Saudi, which we did at the back end of last year, which out of the traps became a very significant event in terms of revenue. And that is a brilliant example of just how the scale that Informa bring us has accelerated what we could never have done at Ascential. Mm-hmm. Another example is our event in Bangkok. We run that event from a satellite office in Singapore. And when we joined Ascential, it became apparent that they have an office in Bangkok with literally hundreds of people in it. So we could hardly imagine a situation where there was an infrastructure like that and a team on the ground. So they're just a couple of examples of how we've been able to accelerate the growth.
Yeah, that's the scale geographically for sure. And actually, speaking of the Middle East, and just if you were Ascential today, not with Informa, how difficult would it have been for you to have gotten into the Middle East?
It would have been much, much more difficult. And I think there are a couple of reasons for that. The first is that our knowledge of the region, although it wasn't zero, was not expert, if you see what I mean. So I was talking to governments in Qatar, in Dubai, in Saudi Arabia, and I hadn't come to the conclusion of where the event should even be. And I was trying to build the relationships to see what we could do. Whereas what Informa have is they've kind of scoped that all out, and they knew full well where the biggest opportunity was. So there's that, and there's also the fact that they have the contacts with the government agencies, they have the contacts with the venues. So all of that would have had to be built up by us at Ascential, and it would have been very difficult to answer your question.
And expensive, I imagine. And yeah, with that people don't. Sometimes people are like, oh, let's go launch an event in Dubai. if you don't have the knowledge of the market, the people, the relationships, the infrastructure, it's not like you can launch an event here in the US.
Yeah, yeah.
It is a very different can of worms. And so that's really great insight into that. Were there any challenges you found with the integration that you didn't anticipate?
I think no more than you would imagine with any integration. You've got to bear in mind a very relatively small business being integrated into a very big business. So it's kind of the friction points are the obvious ones. They are, we were on Google, now we're moving to Microsoft. You know, we were on this HR system, we're moving to that HR system. We're moving offices, we're doing this, that, and the other. So I think with any integration, I think one of the most important things is to be really realistic about the distraction that causes and the potential disruption that causes. It's not really something that you can avoid, I don't think. It's just part of getting to know another business and trying to fold into that business in a meaningful way. But sure, there were lots of friction points, lots of issues with the integration, but nothing that I think anybody would be particularly surprised by. Ultimately, the two businesses do exactly the same thing, which is to try to bring people together in a meaningful way in their industry and provide focal points, both geographical and during the year, for people to come together. They do basically the same job.
Yeah, no, that's again, it seems so obvious, but I think a lot of, and especially for, I would say, more mid-market companies that do acquisitions or are being acquired, they don't, there is pain involved no matter what. You just have to know, you have to plan for it, and you have to time for it. Is it immediate that you do some of these transitions, or do you wait a year? Or so. And I think the technical part, just the small little thing of moving off Google to Microsoft, it's actually really painful because they're very different systems.
You definitely shouldn't underestimate the impact that has. It just causes friction.
Is there any vision at the business to take this festivalization concept, once you've mastered it with, let's say, the pharmaceutical and the longevity brands, and you continue with the brands that are already within the group, to layer some of that thought process, that strategic vision, onto other events, which may now currently feel very transactional, but need to move into, the event needs to move from transactional to a brand?
Yeah, I think so. Ultimately, I think the whole portfolio, Informa's got, I think it's 1,800 events, it's something like that. Our strategic view is this word festivalization. It's a funny word. It's one of those made up words, but really what it means is moving to an experience-led quality event that is bringing people together using technology, but also using other routes to give people the contacts they need and give people the experience that they expect. We feel that is the way that B2B events are going, and all of our events ultimately will be on that model. And in fact, the word festivalization isn't limited to just Informa festivals. It's used right across the whole of Informa in different contexts. Okay. There's no doubt at all that is the way that we feel high quality events are going to go, and certainly we are doubling down on that as the future.
Well, this actually is a great segue to my next question, because this was very fascinating during our interview, which, by the way, for our listeners, is on YouTube from November 2024 on the H2K Labs channel. But so when we talked last time, you made an observation that I just thought was just very interesting, is that prior to the acquisition, you mentioned Ascential is trading at 350 million pounds. That was about October 2023. You sold for 1.2 billion pounds 9 months later. And you called it an indictment of public markets not recognizing the value of event businesses in the UK, that there was no opportunity to really truly take all of the investment and the true value of the business the public markets would not recognize. So do you still feel that holds true? And if so, why? Because events are killing it right now. I mean, The growth
It
is
just,
insane.
it's honestly a complete mystery to me, Heather. So I think there are a couple of points. The UK market, I mean, obviously it's a bit parochial for most of your listeners, but the UK market has been through a very, very difficult time overall. A a kind of dampening of values that the market is just starting to come out of. So the UK market had a very, very good 2025, and the expectation is it will continue to balance up because historically, all of all a lot of capital went into the US. It's now balancing up. So Europe, UK, Asia, these markets are starting to get more value placed into them. So what that does is that does bring up the valuations of everybody, including the events. But I still think events are undervalued. And what is so strange is if you look at the structure of event businesses, they are repeatable. In many events, the revenue is banked months before the event itself. Many of the Informa events have the most extraordinary repeat business, as we know. They're very hard to, if you've got a powerful market leading event, they're very, very hard to shift off the top. So incoming competition is very low. I mean, there are so many reasons why they should be highly valued. In response, the market tends to say there could be another COVID. They're very cyclical. But actually, if you look at the actual evidence and the actual numbers, none of the numbers will tell you that they should be valued at where they are valued. So I think it'll continue to be an issue. I think it'll continue to mean that there are great opportunities for private entrepreneurs to launch, and I think the attractiveness of being in events, if you've got a good idea and you can execute well and you understand your market, it'll continue to be a very, very attractive place to be.
Yeah, again, I'm more, my head's at is more the U.S., obviously the U.S. market, and evaluate. We don't really have event organizers that are on
the public markets.
On the public markets. They if they were, they got taken off and made, private again.
Yeah.
It's almost interesting when I tell people what I do, who are not in the industry. And I hate to use this banal, like, well, oh, you plan weddings, or you're I know. it's like, do you understand this mark? Like, and I always have to give them the example of, okay, where are you? What do you do? Okay, I'm a financial, I go, do you go to events like Money 2020 or they're like, oh yeah. Or if they're even in the spa and beauty industry, do you go to these mega? Yes, of course I do. That's the market. Like, who do you think puts on these events? and what do you think the revenue is around it? And it's really interesting. I think there's also just this lack of understanding of the power of, like, that it's part of their professional experience. And in addition, and especially with this AI, all of these startups and AI burgeoning, that the thing that came up in my mind was like, events are going to be the catalyst for many of these startups. Like, it's their launch pad. It's like, we create markets. So,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just my next question is, and it's going back to the creativity, innovation, and brand are now drivers of long-term value. For those listening, what is the math behind that, right? Because there are a lot of operational CEOs, listening to this podcast. They're like, well, how do I make money off of creativity, innovation, and brand? Can you walk through that?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And one of the big challenges, I think, if you've been running a fairly transactional event, like an exhibition, they're very high margin, or they're quite often quite high margin. And so the fear there is, I'm going to dilute my margin if I do anything different. The counter to that is, how long will this model continue in its current state? How long will your customers actually just accept what they're experiencing when they come to the event? And how quickly will it be before there is a competitor coming in to do something slightly different? If you think about Money 2020, when it was launched, it actually launched as an experience-led event, and it straight from the get-go got to great scale. So it is possible to do. So I think the issue there is to try to come up with innovations around experience or connection that you can ultimately find value in. And that value could come from your exhibitors, or it could come from your delegates. So to create opportunities for people to connect, genuinely connect to the right people, that's something of value that you can then charge your customers for. To create an experience where your delegates and your visitors want to be, that can add value to your exhibitors. And so if you take a really big event, if you've got an event that's a fairly scaled event, it might be worth thinking about zoning it out. So is there a zone that I can actually invest in to bring experience, fun, play, whatever that might mean, into that particular zone? And is that a zone that I can then charge customers more for on the exhibition side? So I think it's almost as important to be creative around how am I going to monetize this as it is around what fun and games are we going to have. And this is a conversation I have all the time across Informa, which is, well, hang on a minute, we've got responsibilities to our shareholders, to our bosses, to the board. We've got a budget we've got to hit, we've got margins we've got to hit, and all those things are absolutely true. So the question is, if you're taking a 2 to 3 year view, what can you build that you genuinely think you'll be able to monetize? Maybe not this financial year, but ultimately in financial years to come. And it is a hard merry-go-round to get off. It's funny because sometimes we look at the people often within Informa, they're looking at Cannes Lions and Money 2020, and they're thinking, these are great examples of what we want to try and achieve. And then they're looking at the margin and they're thinking, well, you've got to your position on your margin and everybody accepts it, but my margin is up here. How am I going to bridge that gap? So it's a really, really important question. But I think it's not enough to say, well, that means I can't invest. I'm going to affect my margin. I'm going to affect ultimately my profit. But that's a short-term way of looking at it. So I think that you have to find ways to experiment, to leverage it, to drive revenue, and to innovate.
Yeah, I just conducted a podcast with Michelle Metter, who she's got Fast Forward events. And they do like a wine show in Southern California. But one of the things is the experience, and what makes her, again, she's a bootstrap startup, right? But what makes her show a #1 wine event is that experience. And when we talked about the experience, you mentioned, can it be like an exhibitor or exhibitor driven? And one of the experiences was they took 3 or 4 porta potty stalls and merged them together. This was the exhibitor, and it just had a little sign on the door, but nothing else. And when you walked in, it was like a speakeasy in this porta potty. And she was very nervous about it. Anyway, somehow the attendees there caught on to this. And then, like, all of a sudden, you had this huge line. People were going in. People are hashtagging, sharing it on social media. It's now become like a staple experience within the event. But what she got out of it was one halo effect, i.e., with that explosion of social media exposure that she wouldn't have gotten otherwise. That was free, right? 2, other sponsors were then saying, "How do I do something like that?" So it started Elevate, which, by the way, is a revenue driver because it costs more to do activations like that. And word of mouth got out there for new attendees and other sponsors saying, "Oh, I need to be at that show." So there, I agree. You can't look at it like from the short-term P&L, but it's what can this do if we're successful for events 2, 3, 4, 5. And then the other point you brought up, which I think is really important, is that #1 spot. Like, COVID showed us something, which is if you weren't #1, or maybe you were #1 or #2, if you were 3 or 4, you had a very hard time getting back into the game. It was being #1. And what #1 is now is different. The equation is different than what it was in 2019. And experience is absolutely part of that. not just because of changing expectations of your regular customers, but also Gen Z walking into center stage, and their expectations are wildly different than what we've ever been accustomed to.
Yeah, absolutely right. I completely agree with all of that, Heather. Yeah.
So let's walk over to Conline in 2025, because I want to start getting into this AI discussion, just because that's what we're going to be talking about at Revved Up. Which, by the way, for the listeners, Philip will be there as one of our keynotes. So I'm very excited about that. So there was some controversy around an AI manipulated case study or award. And would love for you to just share what happened. And then you actually had some really salient, important response to that, just to ensure that doesn't happen again, but lots of learnings from it too.
Yeah, it's so our awards are based on people sending in case studies, and it's advertising, marketing case studies. This particular case study had a female professor talking at TED, talking about some statistics. I won't bore people with the details, but she had been manipulated so that her words were changed, but it was impossible to detect that. Absolutely impossible to detect that. But of course, ultimately, out there is somebody who's seen the original, and they're thinking that is not what she actually said on stage at TED. So we were sent the original, and it was very obvious that it had been manipulated by AI. And this opened up a huge can of worms, really, because it wasn't even, it was the creation of the proof points saying we should win this award because of this, this, and this, including what this woman said, and that had been manipulated. So it was very, very difficult situation, and the whole industry kind of reacted to it quite rightly, as we did. So we've now completely revisited all of the protocols for how people can enter the Lions Awards, and we have numerous checkpoints now. I don't think it will necessarily stop cheating, because I don't think it's a bit like doping at the Olympics. Nothing will actually stop it if people really want to go ahead. But I think we have many, many more layers of checking, including things like the CEO of the business needs to sign off every entry. So that then becomes their responsibility, whereas previously there could be a blame game for people lower down the ranks. So we put out an entire new protocol for how to enter. But I think it's just for us, it was really brought home just how difficult it's going to be for so many organizations to manage their way through AI and the potential manipulation of the truth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Have you invested in any technology to scan entries or videos to detect AI?
We are looking into the possibility of building that, but it's actually, it's extraordinarily difficult. I mean, if I could show you these two films, there's nothing in there. There's nothing in the basic data behind it. There's nothing in the way that it was created that would give you any indication that it wasn't. So we have to find other ways to do it. So we have human checkers. We have other ways to try to verify it. And I also think for the industry, it was a moment of kind of clarity of, well, we can't go on like this. We can't do this as an industry. So we're hoping that our protocols and the industry just kind of waking up to this will in the future help that change. But I think on the broader human sort of cultural, societal level, the amazing similarity between the real clip and the AI clip just shows you that truth and trust is going to be at the heart of every single organization and brand going forward, because ultimately it won't be very long. Genuinely, I don't think it'll be very long before most people are assuming most content is not real.
Mm-hmm.
Unless proven otherwise. Yeah.
No, it's, I mean, this is just a sort of a personal thing. but the AI voice manipulation over the phone, and and my parents are elderly, and they got a call that sounded like me crying, saying I had gotten arrested for
Wow.
hitting a pregnant woman while drunk driving.
Oh my
And they
God.
said, you need to send, I'm her lawyer, you need to send me $10,000 in cash. And thank God, my mom had left me a message saying, we're on our way, don't worry. And I'm like, what is going on here? And so I call my mother, and she's very like panicked, upset. I see her, she picked up on FaceTime. I see her feet on like in a parking lot. I'm like, Mom, where are you? And she's like, we're on our way. I go, what are you talking about? I'm home. They were literally at the FedEx office ready to go send this money.
Wow. Wow.
And she said they sounded exactly like me. And then I looked up this whole scam. They went in front of not my parents, but it's called the grandparent scam. But even though they were my parents, but it just is, you have to be so careful. And yeah, I truth and trust, and just also everyone needs tools to be on their guard, but it's moving so quickly that it's just, even if you were to build something today to go vet it out, it's probably irrelevant and obsolete in next week.
Yeah. 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 Exactly right. Yeah.
So, gone on a positive note, with regard to experience at your events, are you using any type of AI-ish type of technology to help attendees identify things that they may be interested in, or people or connections or content or experiences?
Yeah, we've started to build, particularly around the connections apps that we have, and the way that we help people to connect. We've started to use AI-enabled technology for that. And what it does is it speeds things up and it makes it much more accurate. So in terms of who is it you'd like to meet, what sort of person would you like to meet, how can we make that meeting possible? We're moving from that being quite heavy lifting human endeavor into a much more AI-enabled opportunity. And likewise on our content-led events, more opportunity to really curate the experience from a content point of view. So, all of those positives, I think, are definitely going to help businesses, help us be more productive, help the user have a better experience, help our customers. And so that's all the positive side of AI. And there is a lot of positive side of AI. And I think I might have mentioned this last time, but the other really, really positive side of AI is it is going to massively increase the value of human connection. I'm sure about that. And we should, we should bank on people wanting to be together more than ever before.
Yep, absolutely. I think the AI part is absolutely going to drive that. But the other part, and I have a daughter who's 20, turning 21 next month. So she's a digital native, Gen Z example. And one of the things that I noticed that I think also is going to drive the in-person human connection is one, the amount of socialization that is done on screens and phones, like, has really created loneliness, and just harder for them to, she's very social, don't get me wrong, but they are really going to actually not only want but need events to help them learn how to network in a face-to-face environment, build relationships, and without technology really driving it. Which again underpinned by AI. But the second part is the remote work, which hasn't seemed to it's gone away somewhat, but it's created again this loneliness. Like, there's so many studies out there about loneliness right now. And I just remember when I graduated from college, and I had my college friends. The minute I went to work, all of a sudden I had my work friends. Like but you made them in the office. And so I think the need for human connection, tribalism, which is, part of human nature, is, I think events are here to stay. So, and not only stay, but grow in importance within every person's life. So, we're getting close to time, but I just wanted to talk about one thing before we move to my last question, which is you've talked about the right to play beyond events, and you've been successful with Conline in diversifying revenue from just event only into digital and services, awards, just a variety, like an incredible portfolio that you integrated portfolio. But you've said also that not every event organizer should attempt 365 strategies.
Correct.
What are the specific assets or market position that an event must have to say, you know what, this is the right move for us to pursue?
Yeah. So the context is that I think it's funny because everybody who's got maybe they've got a digital data play, all they want to do is launch events. And everybody who's got an event, all they want to do is launch a digital data play. And it's like, why aren't we just happy doing what we're doing? So my first point to people is, if it quacks like a duck and it walks like a duck, it's probably a duck, and there's no problem being a duck. So number one is, have you maxed out your core? Have you maxed out your event itself? Are you absolutely sure there's no growth to be had anymore from either the core event or geo-cloning your event or whatever it is? That's the first point. The second point is, you do need IP. You need IP. So if you haven't got your own specific IP, then you've got to create it. And as an event organizer, do you have the skills to actually create it? And the answer to that 9 times out of 10 is no. So you're probably going to have to acquire it. So if you look at most of the businesses that we've put around around Cannes Lions, a lot of them we've acquired, we've bought them. So it's not as easy as it looks to get that revenue stream going for 365. Now, the businesses that we have created have been because we've got unique IP. So if you take, for example, we've got quite a successful digital subscription business coming out of Cannes Lions. That is based on the winners of the awards. So the awards come into us, and within those awards, there's all sorts of data, really interesting stuff that people will pay money for. And so you've got something to actually build your business on. What I see many, many event organizers do is they say, look, we've obviously got a fantastic market position in aviation, whatever it might be. Now we need to build out a 365 business model. Well, what with? So I do think it's, I think the number one rule, I think the first thing is, are you sure you've maxed out on your core? And then are you sure you've got IP that somebody's prepared to pay for? And if not, you're going to have to acquire it, because it's very hard to create it from nothing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that score. It's the new one, by the way, is everyone wants to not just have an event or media but community, and which is this, like, which to this point is, you can't have a community unless, one, you actually have an engaged community that's large enough for you to go after, and two, can you deliver value 365, 247, and three, that value has to go beyond just, I would say, content, because content is free in most places. So what is the value that you can deliver outside the live event experience?
Yeah.
So all right, so my last question is, we're very honored to have you keynote at Revved Up in March. But as someone who's moved from consumer media to B2B events, and now in this role of Chief Creative Officer across, some mega events across the globe, what's the single most important insight about revenue growth that does not get enough attention from executives running media events or community-based businesses?
Oh, that's a great one. An understanding that innovation drives growth, but innovation, it has two very important elements to it. The first is creativity, and the second is process. So having ideas is only half the story. You then need a process to embed that into your organization. And that process needs to be measurable. It needs to have KPIs. It needs to be taken very, very seriously, because otherwise you end up with many ideas and no real action. So I think one of my roles, one of the reasons I'm in this role really is to try to unlock that a little bit, which is okay, so we've got these revenue streams. How are we going to build other revenue streams? How are we going to think about what our customers want? How are we going to build things for those customers? How are we going to monetize that? Innovation and creativity is part of it, but then the process and the business modeling is also equally important. So I think all businesses, but event organizers in the B2B space especially, need to understand that, and from that unlocks a lot of growth.
I think the process part is such an important point. And, example, just going back to that, like, let's launch a community or an awards program.
Mm-hmm.
There is so much process connected to both those two. It's not just who is new on the team, new customer journey requirements, new technology and platforms, communication, even data and privacy protocols that have to go into that. So that's something I think that's a really, really just a great tip for CEOs.
I mean, we've got an entire diagnostic just around awards. So, there's a hierarchy of awards in this world. There is a reason why an Oscar is a very valuable award. There's a reason why a Cannes Lion is a very valuable award, and it's not legacy and it's not history. There are actual business reasons why it works.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason why there are many awards in this world that make a few $100,000 from a dinner, and that's it. So again, it depends on the market, it depends on your industry, it depends on competition, it depends on what problem you're trying to solve for people with the awards. But just launching an awards is very, very rarely a good idea, because you've got to think about the reasons why you would do that.
Oh, well, and I could talk about this for a whole other podcast, but there's a lot of danger in launching awards if not thought out well. And there's a big example that just happened on LinkedIn prior to the holiday. But
what was that? What was that?
So there's an awards. It's actually for event industry leaders, and It's a company, I believe, out of Barcelona, and they get people to. They say you're nominated. Now go shout out on LinkedIn that not you're nominated. Vote for me.
Mm-hmm.
And then a few of the very high profile event leaders actually went out and said, I've been nominated, but please don't vote for me. This awards program is BS.
Really? Oh dear. That's not what you want.
No, right. They just didn't, because it's nominating somebody. There's just, again, awards have to be super credible and have to be really trustworthy. So I felt badly for the company in Barcelona, but not my problem. So anyway, all right, now I'm going to move on to something called rapid fire. So what's a little known fact about your career?
I've been careers are not linear, and I've had lots of dark times, and I've been fired and all sorts of things. It's funny because if you look at LinkedIn, everybody's career seems to be very like this, and the reality is, if you did an alternative, it's funny, isn't it? Maybe I should do that. Do an alternative LinkedIn, all the things that have gone wrong in my career.
Yeah, they say. My mom, I've been fired as well, and my mom told me when it happened that some of the most successful people in the world, they've been fired because it's actually part of the learning journey. So, coffee or tea?
Depends on the time of day. Tea first thing, then coffee all the way.
Okay, I'm the opposite. Savory or sweet?
Savory, definitely. Yeah, it's better for you.
And then, what's the best business book you've read this year?
Well, I haven't read business books for a while, but I have just finished a fantastic book called The Wide, Wide Sea by a guy who rejoices in the incredible name of Hampton Sides. And the book is about a guy called Captain James Cook, who Americans might not know so much, but he was a naval officer for the United Kingdom back in the 1700s. And he journeyed to Australia, New Zealand, and the South Seas. And on his third journey, he was actually murdered in Hawaii. But he's the most extraordinary man, brave and innovative and driven and fascinating. And this is the story. This book is the story of his third voyage to the South Seas. And I can't recommend it highly enough. It's amazing.
Perfect. We actually do we have a book club we're launching on Revenue Room CXO. So we'll put that down and make sure that let them know that you recommended it. So Philip, thank you for joining us today. It's been such a pleasure. For our listeners, if you have questions or want to connect with Philip, we'll share his LinkedIn in our show notes. And remember, he'll be at Revved Up 2026, March 23rd through the 24th at the Vinoy in St. Petersburg, Florida. The other part is the conversation doesn't end here. So please learn more about Revenue Room CXO, which is our professional network and executive education platform for revenue critical CEOs and CXOs in media, events, data information services. So with that, thank you, listeners. Please make sure to listen to our show on Spotify, YouTube, or Apple podcast and give us a like. We'll see you next time.